Well, thank you very much, Joe, and thank you all for coming today and joining us for this conversation. Before I begin, I just want to express not just my thanks to Joe and his amazing staff for doing this exhibition so beautifully, but for making this incredible museum happen. You know, those of you who live in this community and are able to partake of it frequently understand this far better than people like me who drive up from Beacon 2 or 3 times a year. But there's an energy and a hamishness about this place that you don't find in any other kind of any other museum I can think of. This is a unique cultural space functioning. And little did we know back when the idea was just being floated that something like this would be embraced by the community of Western Massachusetts. But you have embraced it, and that's the difference. You know, museums are the people who use museums, and when you have great people working and great people using the museum, something amazing can happen, and I think that's what we see here. And the other side is that Joe has been fearless, and I think that's really important. You know, museums need to be unafraid to fail. If a museum is afraid to fail, afraid to take risks, why bother? And Joe takes risks. And nine times out of 10, they succeed wonderfully. 1 time out of 10, they fail, and that's just fine. It's just fine. Because we all experience that in a way that's quite useful. So, again, thank you, Joe. Thank you, MASS MoCA.
I second all that. I second all that. It's been really a great experience working here, and I've worked with other museums. But here, everything was possible. The staff, the crew, the hanging, everything was possible, and more. Yeah. And that's really extremely unusual.
Well, you and I have known each other a long time, and you know, when asked if I will have a conversation with you, it's like, oh, you mean do something I love doing, you know, and do it in public? Sure, why not? Because you're one of my very favorite people to talk with. But I think that today we should probably go into territories that we haven't spoken about a lot in the past, if we can.
I have no idea what he's planning.
Either do I. So that makes 2 of us. But I think we can start off with, since we're talking about MASS MoCA, we're talking about museums, with, you know, your take on the purpose of an exhibition like this. You know, when I was at the Whitney in particular, when we would do mid-career survey shows like this, you're mid-career now, right? Another 40 years ahead, but you know, you got...
Actually, you were the one who said this to me, that doing a mid-career or survey like this, and it was very accurate and very profound what you said. It's more important for the artist than it is for the audience. And this show was very important for me because I was able to look at all that work and is that all there is?
Well,
right?
Yeah. Well, but that is the key. It's when you produce an enormous amount of work over a long period of time, and it all kind of disappears into the world, into people's homes or into institutions, and you gather it back together again. The experience of seeing that together is hopefully profound for all the audiences, but the most profound audience is the artist himself. And I saw that time after time at the Whitney. So the question is, now that, you know, your work is complicated. The language is complicated. The syntax and vocabulary you employ is complicated. You know, the issues you're dealing with are multi-layered, some very difficult and sensitive issues, as well as some very hermetic kind of concerns as well. So now you come up, the work's done, it's all up. You actually have a chance to walk, see all this.
And walk away from it.
How does it make you feel at this point?
It's great. I mean, it's an opportunity to be done with it. Because you know that there are many bodies of works that I do that may have started 20 years ago with a seed, and I have this seed in my head. I'll make 1 or 2 works. I'll park it somewhere in storage, thinking I'm not ready for it. And then I come back to it 20 years later when I'm ready for it, because of many, many reasons. The work always has to grow organically. I can't just force it. And so there's a real learning curve. And I feel like I've arrived at at the end of a cycle here. So the show, for me, represents the fact that I can walk away from it now.
But there, you know, I want to understand the specific things that you've found out about the work now, seeing the opera laid out. You know, when one of those rooms is pretty amazing, but when you have all of them together, you find that you are in an operatic narrative flow, that these stories move into one another, that they affect one another, that there's a sense of confusion, but also enlightening moments as you move from one of these picture spaces into another. You know, does that hold together for you? Is the story that is now in this exhibition of The Wandering Veil the story you wanted to tell?
Surprisingly, it kind of holds together in a way that is beyond my thinking words. It's there, I feel it's there, and I have less of a need to explain it, which is a good thing.
That's true. I mean, for a long time, either people came to your studio, maybe saw one piece, but you'd have to kind of say, you have to understand it's going to be here, it's going to be like this.
And somehow things are linked to each other. They connect, they reflect on each other. All the works are veils of each other. You see everything through each other, both physically and theoretically, right?
Yes, but it's also, you know, a set of theater sets that you've created, a set of theaters, you know, a series of theaters. And the visitors find themselves in these theaters, in these theatrical spaces, but there's no script for them. There are no lines for them. They have to find their way into this story, and finding their way in is not easy. These are difficult and
well, there are windows.
There
are the texts, whether it's Shahid's poetry or a Kafka text or references to things that are windows into the works. You know, in the old days, Renaissance, Baroque, the artists painted stories that came from the Bible or the New Testament, and those
everybody knew the stories,
or didn't know the story, and it was a way to deliver the story to people who didn't read. But it was there as a foundation. And then modernism came and threw away the notion of story, which for me was a story in itself. And
why do you believe that modernism could not coexist with the kind of narrative impulse?
Well, modernism was a very euphoric time that wanted to liberate itself from all the constraints of institution, religion, and so forth. I mean, so everything was broken down, and many times the baby was thrown out with the water. And it basically, in my mind, it took the audience to a place where the audience was so confused and so afraid to enter any level of narrative, starting to believe a weird thing that maybe the world runs without a narrative.
Well, that's a bizarre thing to think about. I mean, we all have narratives.
But modernism gave that.
The idea that one could live outside of one's story or of any story.
That there wasn't any story, that there was no need for any story, that it was just what it is.
That the appearance was what
As
it
if
was.
the possibility of thinking that something is just what it is not a story to itself.
But you know, that kind of formalist sensibility is not absent from your work too. There's real formal rigor in the work.
Absolutely, because formalism is a great story, so I'll embrace it. It's just in the way that I embrace all the possibilities of pictorial space.
Let's talk about pictorial space, because you know these 5- and 6-layer tool paintings, you know, they are physically creating this space, but they create space in a different way as well.
Well, the pictorial space is a way that society, or painter, us, portray ourselves, and it involves the way that it involves our perception of the world. And it's either a portraiture of our perception or an invention of a new perception. It gives you a possibility to see things differently. But every culture has a pictorial space that it is mirror. And it is a product of the culture's ideology and beliefs.
So you think there's some essential quality to the narrative?
Yes, yes.
Isn't that dangerous, though? To think that there's a narrative that has essential qualities? For instance, I mean, there's that wonderful quote in the catalog and the essay about, is there a Jewish art? The Harold Rosenberg essay from 1966. Is there such thing as a Jewish art?
But that was a provocation.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's still a provocation.
Yeah.
And in this exhibition here,
and if
is there something Jewish about your art?
I don't know. And if there was... and if there
you
was,
really don't know?
Huh?
You really don't know?
How can you say something like that? I mean,
is there something Jewish about it? I'll ask again.
Where does the meaning reside? In the object or in your projection?
Or in the kind of questioning that it does?
Yeah,
or in the relationship to a certain set of traditions? Now, tradition is not something that, that you take kind of lightly. You kind of
No, I love traditions. It's more stories. But back to the pictorial space. The pictorial space, different cultures throughout history produce a pictorial space, the pictorial space that they need. For example, and that has to do with the way they perceive their God. If you look at Egyptian art, that lacked linear perspective. What, do you think they couldn't have invented linear perspective? Do you think they were dumb and they couldn't get it done? No, they didn't need it. Do you think when you look at Hindu sculpture that is sort of surreal and Baroque and non-representational, do you think that is because they couldn't invent linear perspective? No, it's because they don't need it. Where I come from, Jewish culture, there was a prohibition against a certain kind of representational space. Therefore, it produced other kind of images.
But also more than just an ancient prohibition against graven images, which, at this point in time, it's, it's sort of not the issue. The issue seems to me the ways in which you were willing to readapt vocabulary elements from a wide range of narrative sources and try to create some new space, both a physical space and a narrative space.
But the new space is also a real space where I exist, the trajectory of my journey from one culture to another. The pictorial space is also, in that sense, is the space you carve out for yourself to live in. Mm-hmm. So it kind of crosses an interesting line between...
So then, tell me about the derivation or how the idea of creating these extraordinary complex paintings as rooms developed.
How did they evolve into rooms?
Yes, I mean specific rooms with entrances and exits, with doors. That they have a domestic purpose that's not being used, but mm-hmm. they imitate the domestic space. In fact, it's one of the things that's so shocking in the Great Hall here is to have all these kind of domestic scaled rooms mm-hmm. Wandering through the space.
Well, the show opens with a kind of a nod to Velázquez' Las Meninas, the painting that puts the viewer in the painting.
More than just putting the viewer in the painting by Velázquez that equated the viewer with the king and queen.
Even better.
That talked to the royalty of the individual viewer, mm-hmm. that we all shared that, mm-hmm. kind of Warholian mm-hmm. in a way. And so, yes, I think it's very important to do that. Also, to have everyone looking at a horse's ass.
So I take the next step, and so what was that?
Also, to have everybody walk in and be confronted by a horse's ass. The first thing you see when you walk in is the ass of the horse that has Herbert Muchamp as Quixote, kind of sliding off of the horse.
The traditional view of Don Quixote is walking into the horizon, isn't it? The silhouettes of Don Quixote.
Right.
Yeah. I allow you to step into the picture itself.
But as a beginning, you're talking about the end. You mm-hmm. begin the show with this ending, with this kind of even somewhat sentimental ending of the great Quixote, moving into the sunset. Without Panza.
He's the Wandering in the Wandering Veil title.
Maybe,
right?
Yeah. Although I think that the Wandering is actually our consciousness as we're trying to make our way through. Every time I walk through this show, mm-hmm. it's a good thing the show is here till September. I'll tell you that, mm-hmm. because this is a show that you need to look at a dozen times. This is not a show that is like a picture stamp gallery that you can walk through and see all the pictures, walk home and say you've seen it. You have to experience this work in a very different way. Mm-hmm. Besides the fact that the works are actually hard to look at. I don't mean they're difficult for you. They're beautiful, but they're physically difficult to allow these pictures to...
because the images are fleeting. You have to be very active in your looking, in your seeing, because the images are running away from you. you have to catch them. That's true.
But you have to slow down.
Yes, you have to slow down.
You know, and I would imagine that very few of the people who've gone through the exhibition the first time have read the poetry first. I feel very few people do that. In fact, they shouldn't have to.
No, they don't
it's
have
actually,
to.
It's actually nice to
Hopefully
be able to go
it will
through
seduce them to read it.
and then come back, having engaged in the collaboration with Ali, with Ali's great poetry, and get something else out of these pictures, out of these picture spaces. Can you talk a little bit about how the relationship with Shahid Ali evolved and where that left you?
We were asked to do a book together by Anne MacDonald, who publishes books about that are collaborations between artists and writers, where the art and the writing is sort of side by side. And when Shahid and I met, we immediately knew that we wanted to do a book, but even more. And we decided to do this project, and we gave it a working title called Veiled Threats, because we thought the Jew and the Muslim should meet on the veil. Mm-hmm. And then, unfortunately, we didn't have too long to work together because he was diagnosed with brain cancer and passed away. But he did write the Veil Suite specifically for this.
Yeah, in fact, I do think that, you know, this poem that he wrote for you, and really...
He wrote it for the project.
Yes, yeah. Right, for the collaboration, is worth hearing. The Veiled Suite. Faceless, he could represent only two alternatives: that he was either a conscious agent of harm, or that he would unknowingly harm me anyway. And that's footnoted, says it, from a dream in which I said this to myself. No mortal has or will ever lift my veil, he says, strokes my arm. What poison is his eyes? Make me now your veil, then see if you can veil yourself from me. Where is he not from? Which veil of tears? Am I awake? There is little sense of whether I am his or he is my veil. For after the night is fog. Who'll unveil whom? Either he knows he is one with the night, or is unaware he's an agent of night. Nothing else is possible. Who is whose veil? When he, random assassin sent by the sea, is putting, and with no sense of urgency, the final touches on whose last fantasy? Where isn't he from? He brought the sky from Vail, Colorado, and the Ganges from Varanasi in a clay urn. His heart measures like the sea. He's brought the desert too. It's deep in his eyes. When he says, I want you to be mine alone. See? What hasn't he planned? For music, Debussy, then a song from New Orleans in the Crescent's time, nearing Penn Station. What of the essence? Not time, no, not time. I can foresee he will lead each night from night into night. I ask, can you promise me this much tonight? We'll stop it there.
You read it well.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a wonderful poem, and I've loved reading it any number of times. But, you know, when you're confronted with poetry of that complexity, you know, how do you respond? What was your initial response to reading this, besides probably crying?
It took me a long time to decode the deep complexity of the poem, because there's so many profound ideas there. But right away, and you can see even on first reading, how linked it is to the work, not by illustrating it, but by the deeper themes and questions behind it.
But it seemed that he intuitively understood your relationship to the notion of veil, to the notion of curtain. And curtain and veil are two very interesting analogous forms. One shuts out, one allows through, but still shuts out a certain amount. But he
talks about veils as being us.
That we are the veils.
We are the veils. And if you think about it, even in simplistic terms, when we walk through a landscape, as we're walking through a landscape, we hide and reveal the landscape. We become a function within a landscape, right? We become the framers.
An element in it.
Yeah. And so it gives you another physical way of understanding yourself as a veil, as something that is sometimes transparent, sometimes not.
What's dangerous, and I think what is kind of probably difficult for some formalist directed readers and critics to understand about your work is your open embrace of metaphor.
Mm-hmm. The veil in the work is physically a metaphor of and the canvas itself.
It's both.
It's both.
Uh-huh.
And the presence of that veil, it brings forward the presence of the canvas. In a normal painting, the oil paint covers the canvas and it no longer exists.
Mm-hmm.
Here, the structure is part of the story.
Do you think
it's an equal actor, an equal character in the rest of the narrative elements involved.
But is there something liberating about that?
Liberating?
Liberating. I mean, you know, you grew up in a kind of period of minimalism and conceptualism, and you know, your education came from that perspective, and yet, you know,
I didn't grow up in minimalism. I grew up in modernism. Minimalism was a more rarefied American thing that I fell into in school here. But my bigger picture was growing up in very deep modernism, because Israel was, you know, this Bauhaus country, and was an idea about modernism that was not just architecturally speaking modernist, but it was really a modernist experiment with some...
Do you mean modernism to the extent that it places individual responsibility for one's own fate and for the fate of the world in the hands of people rather than in the hands of...
If that's a modern idea, then yes.
I mean, I'm saying it avoids the notion of God.
It was a crazy, complex experiment, because they were building a state for the Jews, but it was a secular experiment. And they left all the European tradition behind them, and yet they brought it with it.
How's that working? I read today about the Knesset proposing a law that bans the use of the word Nazi. You cannot use the word Nazi.
So how are they going to address each other?
Well, that is part of the problem. And the editorial writer in the Times today said that means they can't show Seinfeld either. So
yes,
they have another problem. but you know, no soup Nazi. Right? Yeah. But there is this issue of you being willing to be an iconoclast, of you being willing to piss people off, to say things in a way that they need to hear, but in a way that makes it kind of complicated for them to understand what you're saying for quite some time. Like the Messiah's glass, for instance. Yeah,
but my approach was very soft, you know.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Does it? It seems pretty rude to me.
To call something
in the Ark, in the place of the Holy Torah, we have an ass's head.
Yeah, because it was very logical for me, because this book was written about my generation, who are called the Messiah's donkeys, the Messiah's asses, because we do the work, and then the religious people are supposed to take the labor of the secular person and inherit the kingdom of God or something. I mean, some crazy stuff, whatever. Don't even get me there. So I thought, okay, you know, if I'm the donkey, then I'm putting myself there. And
did you get any response when you showed the work in Tel Aviv from Orthodox religious people? Or maybe they don't come to the Tel Aviv Museum anyway?
No, they don't really go to the Tel Aviv Museum. It was very interesting. I had a group, I did a big lecture at the museum, and a lot of people showed up, and a lot of them were religious. And we had a conversation in which I explained that every time they are looking at work that has representational aspects of it, they're basically looking at work that has deeply inherited Christian ideology, Christian values, because representation is essentially a Christian...
because the notion of the icon.
Of the icon. So I said to them, so you go to museums and you look at that, and that's okay with you. So maybe you should be okay with that about the rest of your life, and maybe it shouldn't be so threatening. So by the time they arrived at the donkey in the Ark of Covenant, they were sort of ready and not... they were ready to look at it and ready to hear the story.
Well, it's an amazing technical feat as well. I mean, to work with crystal like that, and to create a work of that has that level of fragility, but also weight at the same time.
And I did it at François' place in Sylvain in Marseille, and I really had an opportunity to. We worked, I don't remember how long, for 6 years. To try and to fail and to really experiment. It took a long time to figure it out. So yeah, it has a lot of all that. You feel it in a sculpture.
You'd like to move from medium to medium.
Because the medium for me is a character. It's like the veil is the canvas. So it's the character of the canvas. The transparent glass in the Shiva sculpture, for example, it's a sculpture of God, but I made this God like a seductive dancer out of seductive glass. That already says something about the notion of a sculpture of God.
Sure.
So you're halfway there. So the material is always, there's something a friend of mine called thematic technique, where theme invents technique and vice versa. And that's something that goes throughout my work. There's nothing that is ever put into the work that is not meant to be part of the story, the narrative of the work itself. Even the photographs are, they're white on white. They're photographs of
particularly like the punctured ones.
Yeah, they're photographs of details of the wax sculpture, which were photographed against white lace. So here's a nod to like Malevich, white on white, the icon, and it disappears of the icon. And I take it a step further. I make the image disappear even more by perforating the paper. That means removing 50% of the paper. Actually, when you send it to the perforating factory, they ask you how much you want to remove, 60%, 70%, 80%. It's a very interesting concept. So let's say 60% of the image is removed, and then the paper itself turned into a veil. So what happens here is photograph. I make you look at photograph.
Well, but it's also, playing with the whole issue of the notion of the icon of Veronica, of the first icon, and of the idea of how the icon emerged. And I know your great friend has written a kind of fairly complex treatise on this, but maybe you want to talk a little bit about your relationship to the notion of the icon.
The icon. Well, for the artist, there are three visual possibilities, basically. To do abstraction, and that would connect to a kind of religion perception of a God, like a monotheistic God who made himself invisible, who is not represented in any which way. The opposite of that would be paganism, the God, for which the abstract God is the one that rebels against the pagan God, right? So the opposite
the
of
visible God.
In paganism, not only is the God always present, but the statue is the God itself. So, and it can be many manifestations of that God. That God is very present, and I didn't abandon you. Shahid talks a lot about that. And it creates a different psychology altogether. It's a different pictorial space altogether. The meaning is in the object, resides in the object, and that's idol worshipping. Comes the Christian church, and they have a problem of idolatry. How do you solve the problem of having an image without having idolatry? So the icon gets invented, and the Veronica veil, the Shroud of Turin. Veronica means vera icona, the true icon, which means that the church owns the true icon. All other icons would be false. So it's again an interesting relationship to paganism, because one God is true, another one is not.
Also kind of an early foray into intellectual property issues then.
Sure. And into this intellectual property argument comes in another aspect. This is the first time, I think, in human history where an image essentially delivers salvation. So I think the majority of Western art, as we know it, lives between the two extremes in representational art, because the icon is a representation, it's not the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that created what Marie-José Monzin, this great French philosopher, talks about. It created what she calls an iconic economy, which is the economy really in which we live, that cannot survive without images.
Mm-hmm.
And us, the artists, are in the middle of that. And for me, because I'm coming from one culture and going to another, which I guess is something that is, globalism is a big story now, and migration and all that, I'm able to deal with these options without hierarchy,
mm-hmm.
as equal stories, as equal options. And you know, and it permeates into everything else in life.
And for Ali, the Kashmiri Muslim, mm-hmm. did he have a kind of a sense of the ways in which you were dealing with the issues of icon and iconography as well? I mean, did he think?
I'm
that,
sure. I never
spoke to him.
I never spoke to him about iconography, but I'm sure.
Mm.
I'm sure of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it in his poems.
Right.
About the mosques and the mosque and the church holding hands together and being reflected in the water. He was also Indian. It all comes together.
Yeah, this is true. What I want to know now that you've had a chance to see, and maybe over the next couple of months you'll have a chance.
And he was also American. He
right,
saw those Indian names of Indian towns on the highway here.
Right, exactly.
So, you know, it really is.
Yeah, no, I like that aspect of who he was. I wish I'd gotten to know him. What I want to know is, now that you're in the process of coming to grips with this body of work, 20 years, almost 30 years
30.
of work, really. But in particular, the last 25 years, I'd say, really critically. Where do you want to go? You know, you said, okay, now I've done that. Now I've done that. But, you know, what do you want to do next in a way that takes advantage of this extraordinary and unique understanding that you've evolved in this body of work and take it somewhere else?
I am thinking that the next thing to do would be to do what I do without thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a good question. Is that possible? Is it really possible to just not think?
No, I didn't say not think. Not think about. I think like I framed all the questions that I needed to frame for myself. The question of the canvas, the question of the pictorial space, the question of representation, all the cultural journeys and all that. So it's all there now. Now, you know, I can cook with my eyes closed, sort of. Let's see what happens. I don't know. I'm thinking the next body of work should be about sex.
About sex?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, can you go a little further there?
I'm not thinking about it. You just have to do it.
This is true. I'd like to open it up to the conversation to all of you folks. The lights are very bright, so it's hard for me to see, but I will repeat your question. Charles is saying, you grew up in a place surrounded by fundamentalists, that is to say, Israel surrounded by Arab nations who are Sunni or Shia and, you know, and more involved in a fundamental relationship to Islam. Is that what you mean?
So we're trying to get at the issue of Jewishness and art, and is that a relevant question or not? I mean, one doesn't ask an Italian American, are you Catholic, like myself, but one assumes that question if you're talking to a Jewish artist. So you have stated that you're a non-practicing Jew, that you're a secular Jew.
I don't believe in God.
Okay, that's one way. To what extent is that informing the work? Is that an aspect of where the work comes from?
To a great extent, because if you don't believe in God, you can look at all the stories about God and in a very fearless kind of way, look at how they're structured, the beauty of them.
Great stories.
The greatness of them, the horrible parts of them. They're just another story. They happen to be very important meta-narratives of every culture. So not being tied down to any one of them gives you a chance to maybe enjoy some of them.
So the literature that comes that's a function of religion, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Islam, is not hierarchically different than any other narrative out there.
No.
For you?
No, it's not.
They're just all available narratives.
It's not, but there are deeper narratives. They're narratives that control our lives in ways that we forgot. Because, I mean, we live in the Gregorian calendar, for God's sake, right? And why should Zulu live in the Gregorian calendar? What does that have to do with it? But we live in it, and we don't even know what it means anymore. We say words, we don't know their etymology anymore. We look at images, we don't know where they came from.
But there are core aspects of contemporary civilization that they may have come from one skewed perspective or another, but we tell time the same way around the world.
Scientists are battling in Switzerland now, finding what, the divine particle? It's like, couldn't they come up with... The God particle. The what?
The God particle.
Couldn't they, like, come up with another name? I mean, it's as simple as that. And because we still think like that. And in fact, when you enter these stories, and you enter how these stories are structured, you can actually make great discoveries. Only last week, I read this article about a scientist who was one of the scientists that are dealing with the discovery of the world, the moment when the world goes from inanimate to animate. And for a long time, the conversation in the scientific world was about content, which expresses itself in DNA or RNA. And he says, wait a second, but what contains this DNA or RNA? And he said, well, it's a veil, it's a membrane. So then he says, well, maybe the creation of the world started with fat that repelled itself from water and by evolutionary chance caught a little piece of RNA or DNA information in it, and that's how it started. So he looks at that story, and it's a kind of almost religious story, right?
Well, any origin myth can be a religious story, especially these days. You could probably form a new religion around that set of
I mean, Marie-José is writing a book now about the Madonna itself as a metaphor for a membrane, for the Word of God impregnating through her and creating the icon. So there's so many ways of reading these stories, and if you look at them without being tied down to the indoctrinated part of it, you can see things in a new way.
But you really are a modernist in this sense.
Yes.
I mean, you're not a postmodern artist.
No, I'm not.
I mean,
I'm not ironic.
Yeah.
I could be funny, so maybe, but not ironic.
No, I think it'd be very funny, but it's true.
Ridiculous, too.
No, you jump in with both feet, like you don't hedge.
No. And because one of the things I always wanted was to when I came to New York, the big story was the distance between the artist and the work, the opacity, the irony, the postmodernist. It didn't feel good to me. I wanted to have no distance between me and my work. Like when I look at my dog and he's in the presence. Do you know what I mean? And strangely enough, I was just reading an article about a religious argument of why it's okay for us to eat animals. I do, unfortunately. It's because they only live in the presence. And I look at that dog and I think, oh my God, if I could be half like him. You know?
That completely zen.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Some more questions? I can't see again. We haven't.
Which hopefully, actually, let's bring it back to the work, that the veils give you a sense of being in the presence of something that at the same time is completely ethereal and is almost not there. Do you see what I mean?
But the veil is also enveloping.
Yeah.
The veil, is also a shroud. It's also a coat. It's also,
But some of the paintings are really paintings, like the paintings of the landscape. They're rectangles and they're not enveloping. Do you know what I mean? So there's both.
Can you talk about the process of working with the veils? How do you apply the paint? And do you stretch it out on the wall, the veil? What kind of tools do you use? The
images are done, they're assembled on computer, like Photoshop, from many, many images that we pull together until we create the set, or whatever you call it, the picture. And then I had a special printer invented for me that can print on three-dimensional material. And it's a digital printer that goes up and down on a 14, 15...
If you go to Izhar's website, there's some video or some images of the machine.
Oh, there are? I was
the
trying to keep it secret.
It was remarkable. It was a remarkable invention. It took him 9 years working with a Korean engineer. 10 years?
20.
20 years. Wow, even more. I mean, it's an amazing, one-of-a-kind machine that breaks every 15 minutes, but because it's just such, it shouldn't work. You know, it's just much too big. But it's an amazing development to create a machine that could paint on various layers of tool.
In any case, this machine allowed me to print I hang the veils as you see them with their natural gravity.
And with pleats.
And with the pleats. So, and then the printer prints directly onto them. If I had to reinvent the pleats, I could never do that. I could never print it flat and then hang it up.
Well, this comes out of the black painting, you know, painting on the black pleated rubber.
Those I did by hand with stencils.
Right.
But then I was looking for things, this was 1986, 85, I painted them. I was looking for more refined ways of getting more ghostly images onto that more ghostly material, which is the tool, or in the trade, it's called illusion. But the technology didn't exist back then.
It's quite wonderful that the specific tool that he's using is called illusion. And Izhar went to a place on Orchard Street that sells all sorts of tool, and was trying to explain to this guy why he wanted huge swaths of this tool in various forms. That must have been an interesting afternoon.
It was funny. It was very surreal talking to him, because I asked for tool, and he said, well, in this country we don't call it tool, we call it illusion. I said, okay. And he said, so we were on to the next step. He said, how much do you need? How much illusion do you need? And I said, how much do you got? And he said, as much as you want. And he said, well, how about a couple of 1,000 yards? Well, that's okay. And he said, how would you like your illusion? And I said, what do you mean? He said,
grand. You only want a grand illusion.
He said, how big do you want the holes in your illusion? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it comes medium size and small. I said, well, I'll probably take all. He said, would you like it soft or stiff? Would you like it pink or white? And it just went on and on. And I thought, this is like a Woody Allen movie.
I hope he comes up to see the show.
I don't know if he's still with us.
Yeah, that is possible. You know, collaborations have been a very important part of your work. And obviously collaborated with, with Herbert with Herbert Muschamp in interesting ways. You collaborated with Nam June Paik in ways, and this was kind of our first bridge, our first connection, because Paik was my mentor and a mentor for you as well. Can you talk a little bit about the work you did with Nam June Paik? Paik, by the way, for those of you who don't know, was the godfather of video art. He was the person who invented that form.
When my first trip to Europe, I think I was 14 years old. And I was, before that, looking through all these art books and seeing all these pictures from the Renaissance and the Baroque and history. But I grew up in a culture that didn't have that. I mean, there was no Christmas, there was no images of Jesus anywhere, it just doesn't exist. Not in the realm where I grew up. It's just not there. And I go to Europe, and I go to the Louvre, and I go to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and all these pictures of Christ on the cross, half naked, and I'm like thinking, what is it doing here? This should be in the church. It was really kind of frightening and very disorienting, because I wasn't sure it was art. I didn't know what it was, but it was very, very powerful. And then I went to the Stedelijk Museum, and there was Nam June Paik Buddha watching this Brian Vega TV. And I thought, I was 14 years old, and I thought, oh, this is perfect. When I grow up, I want to be like this. And then I went up to the second floor, and they had a Mondrian. And I thought, oh, this museum has the best art in the world. It's an oil painting. It doesn't have any of the crap on it. And the oil is cracked. So I thought it was very authentic. And then years later, Nam and I were showing in the Whitney Biennial together. And you know, he was a kind of a little lazy. So he was always looking for people.
Young people to do the work.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
He'd call you a boy genius and then get
exactly,
you to do the work, right?
Exactly. So he came to the, he asked Holly to introduce us. We were both showing at the same gallery. And he said, tomorrow you come to my studio, we collaborate. And it was very interesting because he was just at the, it was a moment in his life where he was embracing the Korean side of him, beginning to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think I really pushed him over the edge with that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I love the big collaborative.
And we started with this funerary piece, which was called originally Funeral TV, I think. I think the subtitle was like, "It's not so hard, you can do it." Which was a mix of Chinese, Buddhist, and Jewish funerary rites, and it was.
I think it's a great meditation on the idea of funeral.
And then I remember when he came to the studio to put the paint on the object, and he was very sick, and he had diabetes, and he couldn't walk well. And this is another interesting thing about talking about religion. And he said, "Oh, you have to give me a little stool because I can't stand up for long because the Buddha has punished me for all I've done to him." And I said, "Fuck you, so why are you getting me involved in this?" And he said, "Oh, the Buddha can't touch you, you're Jewish." Which is profound, right? In fact, it's true.
I hope it's true for your sake.
I wouldn't mind being touched by the Buddha.
Are there any more questions or comments?
Are there other artists or art movements or projects anywhere in the world that particularly fascinate you or you would recommend, or technologies that you find fascinating that you really want to get involved in?
That I want to get involved in?
Or something that fascinates you that's caught your attention.
Bernini's Apollo and Daphne?
For instance.
Yes.
I mean, I think the question is an interesting one, which is, do you see yourself part of the conversation, which is the art world minus the art market? You know, you take the market out of it for a second. The art world is really this conversation that's taking place around the world. Do you see yourself part of that?
I'm definitely part of the conversation as far as I'm concerned, but my microphone is not always turned on.
That's a good metaphor. Or is it a simile? Well, if I don't see any more questions, I'd just like to thank you, Izhar.
Cheers. Thank you.
And again, thank all of you for coming and spending some of your Saturday afternoon with us. We're going to go to the gallery now. And if you haven't had a chance to spend a lot of time, this is the beginning of your opportunity to spend a lot of time in the Wandering Vail.